In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a single gunshot shatters the peace, leaving Colonel Prothero dead in a locked room. Who could slip past bolted doors? Why does the clock lie about the time of death? As whispers of forbidden love, hidden wills, and buried secrets swirl, Miss Jane Marple unravels a web of deceit. Was it the scorned wife, the brooding artist, or someone hiding in plain sight? One truth will unmask the killer, but at what cost?
Chapter 1. The Vicar's Uneasy Tea Party. The late August sun draped St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, softening the edges of the village's stone cottages and coaxing the scent of roses from neatly trimmed gardens. At the vicarage, a rambling Georgian house with ivy-clad walls, preparations were underway for an afternoon tea that promised more than polite conversation. Vicar Leonard Clement, a wiry man with a perpetually furrowed brow, adjusted his clerical collar as he surveyed the garden. The long oak table, set beneath a sprawling yew tree, gleamed with polished silver and bone china, but Leonard's unease was palpable. Today's gathering wasn't just a social affair, it was a crucible for tensions that had simmered in the village for months. "Griselda, must we have the colonel here?" Leonard muttered, his voice low as he glanced at his wife. Griselda, a vivacious woman with a penchant for bright scarves and brighter laughter, was arranging scones on a tiered stand. Her auburn curls bounced as she waved off his concern. "Oh, Len, don't fuss. Colonel Prothero's a bore, but he's the church warden. We can't exactly leave him out." She flashed a mischievous grin. "Besides, it'll be amusing to watch him try to be charming." Leonard sighed, his fingers twitching toward the prayer book he always carried. "It's not his charm I'm worried about. It's his temper. And this business with the church funds. He's been dropping hints about an audit. An audit, Griselda, as if I'd mismanage a penny." Griselda's eyes sparkled with defiance. "Let him audit. You've nothing to hide. Now, help me with these napkins before the guests arrive." The garden soon buzzed with the arrival of St. Mary Mead's notables. Ms. Lestrange, a newcomer with a guarded smile and a penchant for black silk dresses, drifted in like a shadow, her eyes scanning the crowd with quiet intensity. Beside her, Lawrence Redding, the village's resident artist, carried an air of restless energy. His paint-stained fingers clutched a glass of lemonade, and his gaze lingered on Anne Prothero, the colonel's wife, whose delicate features were taut with something unspoken. The colonel himself, Lucius Prothero, strode in last, his military bearing and booming voice dominating the scene, his tweed suit strained at the buttons, a testament to his fondness for roast beef and port. "Vicar!" Prothero barked, clapping Leonard on the shoulder with enough force to make him wince. "Fine spread this, though I trust the church coffers haven't been raided to pay for it." His laugh was a harsh bark, and the guests fell silent, their smiles brittle. Leonard forced a chuckle. "Not at all, Colonel. The scones are Griselda's doing, and the tea's from our own pantry." Prothero's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, turning instead to survey the table. Anne, standing beside him, offered a tight smile. "It's lovely, Griselda," she said softly, her voice barely carrying over the clink of teacups. Her hands twisted the edge of her shawl, and Miss Marple, seated quietly at the table's end, noted the gesture with a flicker of interest. Jane Marple, the village spinster, was an unassuming figure in a lavender cardigan, her white hair neatly pinned and her knitting needles clicking softly. To the casual observer, she was merely a kindly old lady, but her pale blue eyes missed nothing. She sipped her tea, her gaze drifting from Anne's nervous hands to Lawrence's restless pacing to the colonel's domineering posture. The garden, she thought, was a stage, and its players were hiding their lines. "Miss Marple, you're awfully quiet," Griselda teased, passing her a plate of cucumber sandwiches. "Plotting a new scarf pattern, or solving the mystery of who stole Mrs. Price's prize marrow?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a gentle smile. "Oh, my dear, I'm just enjoying the company. People are so fascinating, don't you think? Like books waiting to be read." Griselda laughed, but the colonel's voice cut through the moment. "Enough chatter," he said, standing at the head of the table. "I've something to say." The guests froze, teacups hovering mid-air. Prothero's mustache twitched as he surveyed them, his eyes glinting with purpose. "The church accounts are a mess. I've been too lenient, but no more. I'm ordering a full audit, starting tomorrow, every shilling accounted for." A ripple of unease passed through the group. Leonard's face paled and Griselda's hand tightened on her teapot. Mrs. Lestrange's expression remained impassive, but her fingers brushed the locket at her throat. Lawrence Redding, leaning against the yew tree, snorted softly, earning a glare from the colonel. "Something amusing, Redding?" Prothero demanded. Lawrence shrugged, his smile sharp. "Just wondering how you find time for audits between your hunting trips, Colonel. Must be exhausting, keeping the village in line." The air crackled. Anne's hand shot out, touching her husband's arm, but he shook her off. "Mind your tongue, boy," Prothero growled. "I've half a mind to look into your affairs next. Artists don't live on air, do they?" Lawrence's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, turning to sip his lemonade. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes flicking between the two men. The tension was broken by Griselda's bright voice. "More tea, anyone? Or shall we have some music? Dennis," she waved to her nephew, a lanky teenager hovering near the sandwiches. The boy scurried off, and soon the scratchy strains of a jazz record filled the garden, easing the atmosphere. Guests resumed their chatter, but the undercurrent of discord lingered. Miss Marple watched as Anne excused herself, slipping toward the rose arbor with a hurried glance over her shoulder. Moments later, Lawrence followed, his steps deliberate. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her mind cataloging the exchange. As the afternoon wore on, the guests mingled, their conversations a tapestry of village gossip and veiled barbs. Mrs. Price, the local busybody, recounted the theft of her marrow with theatrical outrage, while Dr. Haydock, the village physician, debated rose pruning with Miss Marple, his jovial tone masking a nervous glance toward Prothero. The colonel, meanwhile, held court near the tea urn, lecturing a captive Leonard about fiscal responsibility. "You mark my words, Vicar. There's funny business in those ledgers. I'll root it out, even if it means turning this village upside down." Leonard's voice was strained. "I assure you, Colonel, the accounts are in order. Perhaps if you'd review them with me first?" "Review?" Prothero scoffed. "I don't trust reviews. I trust facts, and I'll have them by week's end." Griselda swooped in, her smile dazzling. "Colonel, you must try the lemon drizzle cake. Mrs. Price swears it's her best yet." She steered him toward the dessert table, giving Leonard a moment to breathe. Miss Marple noted the vicar's clenched fists, the way his eyes darted toward the vicarage's back door, as if longing to escape. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lawn, the party began to disperse. Mrs. Lestrange murmured her goodbyes, her dark eyes lingering on Prothero with an unreadable expression. Dr. Haydock offered to walk Mrs. Price home, while Dennis cranked the gramophone one last time, earning a scowl from the colonel. Anne returned from the arbor, her cheeks flushed, and Lawrence emerged shortly after, his expression guarded. Miss Marple, gathering her knitting, paused by the garden gate. She glanced toward the vicarage, where Leonard stood alone, staring at the yew tree. Something caught her eye. A flicker of movement in the shrubbery beyond the lawn. A figure, cloaked in shadow, stood motionless, watching the departing guests. Miss Marple's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression serene, tucking the observation away like a stitch in her knitting. "Lovely afternoon, Vicar," she called softly, her voice carrying a warmth that belied her racing thoughts. Leonard started, turning to her with a strained smile. "Indeed, Miss Marple. Thank you for coming." As she strolled toward her cottage, the village settling into the quiet of early evening, Miss Marple's mind hummed. The tea party had been a tableau of human nature, pride, fear, secrets, all laid bare beneath the polite veneer. Prothero's audit loomed like a storm cloud, and the village was a tinderbox of motives. Yet, as she reached her gate, the world seemed calm once more. The vicarage door was locked, the guests gone, and the day's tensions tucked away, for now. Inside the vicarage, Leonard sank into his study chair, the weight of Prothero's words pressing on him. He reached for his prayer book, seeking solace, unaware that the seeds of a far darker drama had already been sown in the garden's golden light.
Chapter 2. Whispers in the Mist. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a shroud of mist curling like ghostly fingers around the village's thatched roofs and ancient oaks. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and fading roses, and the streets lay quiet, as if the village held its breath after the previous day's strained tea party. Miss Jane Marple stood at her garden gate, her lavender cardigan buttoned against the chill, her eyes sharp beneath the brim of her straw hat. She clutched a pair of pruning shears, but her attention wasn't on the roses. She was listening to the village waking up, its secrets stirring in the fog. The vicarage loomed across the lane, its windows half hidden by the mist. Yesterday's tea had left a residue of unease, like a stain on fine linen, and Miss Marple's mind was already threading together the fragments she'd observed. Colonel Prothero's blustering threat of an audit, Anne Prothero's trembling hands, Lawrence Redding's defiant smirk. Something was brewing, and the mist seemed to cloak more than the landscape. She snipped a wilted rosebud, her movements deliberate, when a sharp voice pierced the quiet. "Morning, Miss Marple. Out early, aren't you?" It was Mrs. Price, the village's self-appointed chronicler of gossip, bustling down the lane with a basket of eggs. Her round face was flushed, her eyes gleaming with the promise of a tale. "Good morning, Mrs. Price," Miss Marple replied, her smile gentle, but her gaze keen. "The roses need tending before the dew settles. And you, off to market already?" Mrs. Price leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Not quite. I heard something at the butcher's yesterday, after that tea party. Folks are saying Colonel Prothero's got enemies aplenty. Did you see how he went after poor Vicar Clement, calling him out in front of everyone? And that's not the half of it." She paused for effect, clutching her basket. "They say he's been threatening to evict old Archer, the poacher, from that shack by the woods. Says it's on his land." Miss Marple's needles might have been at home, but her mind was knitting now, stitching Mrs. Price's words into the pattern of yesterday's tensions. "Archer's been in that shack for years," she mused. "The Colonel's not one for sentiment, is he?" "Not a bit," Mrs. Price huffed. "And there's talk he's got his eye on Dr. Haydock, too. Something about a medical license, though nobody's clear on it. Oh, he's stirred up a hornet's nest, that man." As Mrs. Price trundled off, Miss Marple turned back to her roses, her thoughts racing. Prothero's audit was a spark, and the village was dry tinder. She glanced toward the vicarage, where a faint light glowed in the study window. Leonard Clement was up early, no doubt wrestling with the Colonel's accusations. She made a mental note to visit later, perhaps with a jar of her homemade marmalade as an excuse. The lane stirred with life as the mist began to lift. A bicycle bell jingled, and Dennis, the vicar's nephew, pidled past, his school cap askew. "Morning, Miss Marple," he called, waving cheerfully. She waved back, noting the boy's flushed cheeks. Had he been running errands or sneaking about?
Young boys, she knew, were often privy to secrets adults overlooked. Her pruning done, Miss Marple wandered toward the village green, where the mist clung stubbornly to the grass. Near the war memorial, she spotted Anne Prothero, her slight figure swathed in a pale green coat. Anne was walking slowly, her head bowed, but she paused by the postbox, glancing around before slipping a small envelope from her pocket. Miss Marple, half hidden by a hawthorn bush, watched as Anne hesitated, then pushed the letter through the slot with a trembling hand. Moments later, Lawrence Redding appeared, striding across the green with his usual restless energy. His scarf was loosely knotted, and his dark hair fell into his eyes as he scanned the area. Anne froze, then hurried toward him, her steps faltering. Miss Marple, pruning shears still in hand, edged closer, using the bush as cover. The pair met near the memorial, their voices low but urgent. "You shouldn't be here," Anne whispered, her eyes darting toward the cottages. "If anyone sees us—" "They won't," Lawrence cut in, his tone sharp but softened by a glance at her face. "Did you do it?" Anne nodded, her fingers twisting the edge of her coat. "I'm posted. But Lawrence, I'm frightened. If he finds out—" "He won't!" Lawrence's hand grazed her arm, a fleeting touch that carried more weight than words. "Trust me, Anne, this is the only way." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she remained still, her face a mask of calm. The exchange was brief, and soon Anne hurried back toward the high street, while Lawrence lingered, lighting a cigarette with unsteady hands. As he exhaled, the smoke curled into the mist, and he muttered something under his breath before striding off toward his studio. Miss Marple tucked the moment away, her mind humming. A letter, a meeting, a threatened eviction, a doctor's unease. She resumed her walk, her steps measured, when a rustle in the hedgerow caught her ear. She paused, peering into the mist, but saw nothing but the flicker of a bird's wing. Still, the sensation of being watched prickled her skin, and she quickened her pace toward the vicarage. Inside, Leonard Clement sat at his desk, surrounded by ledgers and a cooling cup of tea. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed from a sleepless night. Griselda, bustling in with a tray of toast, frowned at his expression. "Len, you look like you've seen a ghost. It's that wretched colonel, isn't it? Honestly, the man's a bully." Leonard rubbed his temples. "It's not just him, Griselda. An audit means scrutiny, questions. The church funds are fine, but there was that mix-up last spring, Mrs. Lestrange's donation. It wasn't recorded properly, and now—" he trailed off, his voice heavy with dread. Griselda set the tray down with a clatter. "That was a clerical error, nothing more. You fixed it. If Prothero wants to make a fuss, let him. He's got no proof of anything." "But he's determined," Leonard said, his voice barely above a whisper, "and he's coming here tonight to discuss it. Alone." Griselda's eyes widened. "Tonight? Oh, Len, you can't let him bully you in your own home. Tell him to come during the day, with witnesses." Leonard shook his head. "He insisted. Said it's private. I can't refuse him. He's the church warden." A knock at the door interrupted them. Griselda opened it to find Miss Marple, holding a jar of marmalade and wearing her usual serene smile. "Good morning, my dears," she said, stepping inside. "I thought you might enjoy this with your breakfast. The oranges were particularly fine this year." Griselda's face brightened. "Miss Marple, you're a saint! Come in, have some tea. Len's in a state over that beastly colonel." Leonard flushed, but Miss Marple's presence seemed to steady him. She settled into a chair, her eyes flicking to the ledgers on the desk. "Trouble with the accounts, Vicar?" she asked lightly, as if discussing the weather. Leonard hesitated, then sighed. "Prothero's insisting on an audit. He's convinced there's something amiss. It's nonsense, of course, but—" he gestured helplessly at the papers. "People do get ideas, don't they? I remember my nephew Raymond when he thought his housekeeper was pilfering. Turned out to be a misunderstanding over a misplaced receipt. But it caused such a fuss." Her tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp, inviting confidence. Griselda seized the opening. "Exactly! It's all a misunderstanding. But Prothero's got in for Len, and he's not stopping at the church.
Mrs. Price was saying he's after Archer and Dr. Haydock, too." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Dr. Haydock? Now that's interesting. He's such a kind man, always so busy with his patients. What could the Colonel want with him?" Leonard shrugged, but his expression darkened. "Who knows? Prothero's got a knack for finding fault. He's like a bloodhound, sniffing out trouble." The conversation was cut short by the chime of the village clock, signaling noon. Miss Marple rose, smoothing her cardigan. "I mustn't keep you from your work, Vicar, but do let me know if I can be of any help. Sometimes a fresh pair of eyes sees what others miss." As she left, the mist had nearly cleared, revealing the village in sharp detail. The butcher's shop bustling, children playing near the green, the postman collecting the morning's letters. Miss Marple lingered by the post-box, her mind returning to Anne's furtive act. What was in that letter, and to whom was it addressed? She made a mental note to keep an eye on the postman's rounds. The afternoon passed quietly, but the village hummed with whispers. At the tea shop, Mrs. Price held court, regaling a small crowd with tales of Prothero's latest threats. "He told Archer he'd have the law on him," she declared, her voice carrying to the street. "And poor Dr. Haydock, something about a patient who died years ago. It's scandalous." Miss Marple, passing by, caught the words and filed them away. She strolled toward the church, where she found Archer himself, a wiry man with a weathered face, skulking near the lich-gate. He started at her approach, his eyes wary. "Good afternoon, Mr. Archer," she said, her tone disarming. "The mist's cleared, hasn't it? Such a lovely day for a walk." Archer grunted, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "I ain't much for walks, miss. Got enough trouble without traipsing about." She tilted her head. "Trouble? Oh, I do hope it's nothing serious. The village has been rather unsettled lately." He scowled, but her gentle persistence drew a reluctant reply. "It's that Prothero. Says I got no right to my shack. Been there nigh 20 years, and now
He wants me out. Reckon he's got plans for the land." "How distressing," Miss Marple said, her voice full of sympathy. "But surely he'll see reason. Perhaps a word with the vicar." "Vicar can't help," Archer snapped, then softened, his shoulders slumping. "Sorry, miss. It's just, I ain't got nowhere else." As he shuffled off, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on his retreating figure. The village was a web, and Prothero was tugging at its strands, pulling secrets into the light. She returned home as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across her garden. The day had been quiet, the village settling into its evening routines, but Miss Marple knew better. The mist might have lifted, but the whispers lingered, and Prothero's shadow loomed larger than ever. Inside her cottage, she lit a lamp and settled into her armchair, her knitting untouched. The pieces were falling into place. A letter, a meeting, a threatened eviction, a doctor's unease. The village was holding its breath, and Miss Marple, with her quiet eyes and sharper mind, was ready to listen as the whispers grew louder.
Chapter 3. The Fatal Appointment. The evening sky over St. Mary Mead hung heavy with the promise of rain, its bruised clouds casting a somber pall over the vicarage's ivy-clad walls. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation, not of the weather, but of the confrontation looming in Vicar Leonard Clement's study. Colonel Lucius Prothero had demanded a private meeting at precisely 6:30 p.m., his letter, delivered that afternoon by a sullen messenger, brimming with imperious urgency. Leonard, pacing the creaky floorboards of his study, felt the weight of the colonel's accusations like a millstone. The church funds, Prothero claimed, were riddled with discrepancies, and tonight he intended to lay them bare. The study was a sanctuary of sorts, its walls lined with theological tomes and a single window overlooking the garden, now shrouded in twilight. Leonard adjusted the green-shaded lamp on his desk. Its glow illuminated scattered ledgers and a half-empty ink pot.
He glanced at the clock, a sturdy oak piece that ticked with relentless precision. 6:15 p.m. 15 minutes until Prothero's arrival. His stomach churned, not from guilt, but from the dread of facing the colonel's relentless scrutiny. Griselda, his wife, poked her head through the door, her auburn curls catching the lamplight. "Len, you're wearing a hole in the rug. Stop pacing and have a biscuit." She held out a tin, her smile a brave attempt to lighten the mood. Leonard managed a weak grin. "Biscuits won't help, my dear. Prothero's coming to flay me alive over those wretched accounts." Griselda's eyes flashed. "He's a bully, Len, and you're no mouse. You've done nothing wrong. If he wants to play inquisitor, let him. You've got the truth on your side." She set the tin down with a clink. "I'll be in the parlor if you need me. Don't let him trample you." As she left, the doorbell chimed, sharp and insistent. Leonard straightened, smoothing his clerical collar, and opened the door to find not Prothero, but Miss Jane Marple, her lavender cardigan dusted with evening dew and a basket of scones in her hands. "Miss Marple!" Leonard exclaimed, surprise softening his tension. "What brings you here so late?" "Oh, Vicar, I was baking this afternoon and thought you and Griselda might enjoy these. Fresh scones, still warm. May I come in for a moment?" Leonard ushered her into the hall, grateful for the distraction. "Of course, though I'm expecting the colonel any minute. He's insistent on discussing the church accounts." Miss Marple's smile didn't waver, but her gaze sharpened, taking in the vicar's taut expression. "Accounts can be such a bother, can't they? All those numbers, so easy to misplace a decimal. My nephew Raymond once had a dreadful time with his taxes, quite innocent, of course." She paused, setting the basket on a side table. "But I won't keep you. I did wonder, though, if you've spoken to Dr. Haydock lately. He seemed rather preoccupied at the tea party." Leonard frowned, caught off guard. "Haydock? Not recently, no. Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason," she said airily, adjusting her hat. "Just something Mrs. Price mentioned about old grudges. The village does love its stories." She glanced toward the study door. "I'll leave you to your meeting, Vicar. Do give my regards to the colonel." As she stepped into the dusk, Leonard felt a flicker of unease. Miss Marple's visits were never as casual as they seemed, her questions like needles threading through hidden seams. He shook off the thought and returned to the study, locking the door behind him, a habit born of late-night sermon writing, though tonight it felt like barricading against a storm. At 6:28, the doorbell rang again, and Leonard's heart sunk. He opened it to find Colonel Prothero, his tweed coat damp from the mist, his mustache bristling with purpose. "Clement," he barked, striding past without invitation. "Let's get to it. No time for pleasantries." Leonard led him to the study, where Prothero settled into a chair, his bulk making it creak. He pulled a notebook from his pocket, its pages marked with precise, accusing notes. "I've gone over the ledgers you sent. Discrepancies, Clement, significant ones. Mrs. Lestrange's donation last spring, £50, unaccounted for. Care to explain?" Leonard's throat tightened. "That was a clerical error, Colonel. The donation was recorded, just delayed. I corrected it months ago." Prothero's eyes narrowed. "Delayed? Convenient. And what about the collection plate shortfall last Easter? 10 shillings missing. You think I don't notice these things?" Leonard's hands clenched. "Those were accounted for. A child took a few coins, thinking they were sweets. I spoke to the parents." "Excuses!" Prothero slammed his notebook on the desk, the sound like a gavel. "I'm not here for stories, Clement. I want facts. Tomorrow I'm bringing in an accountant from London. This parish will be clean, even if I have to tear it apart." The air crackled with hostility. Leonard stood, his voice steady despite his racing pulse. "Colonel, I've served this parish faithfully. If you've accusations, make them plain, but I won't be slandered in my own home." Prothero's face reddened, but before he could retort, the telephone rang, shrill and jarring. Leonard hesitated, then picked up the receiver. "Vicarage, Clement speaking." A muffled voice, low and urgent, crackled through the line. "Vicar, it's about the church hall. There's a problem. Leaking roof. Urgent. Can you come now?" The caller didn't wait for a reply, hanging up abruptly. Leonard frowned, glancing at Prothero. "I'm sorry, Colonel. I need to check on this. It won't take long. Please, wait here." Prothero grunted, waving him off. "Go. But we're not done, Clement." He leaned back, pulling a cigar from his pocket and lighting it, the smoke curling toward the ceiling. Leonard grabbed his coat and stepped into the hall, locking the study door behind him, a habit born of late-night sermon writing, though tonight it felt like barricading against a storm. "Griselda," he called. "I'm needed at the church hall. Prothero's in the study. Keep an eye out, will you?" Griselda appeared, her expression skeptical. "The church hall? At this hour? Len, that sounds odd." "I know, but I'll be quick." He kissed her cheek and hurried out, the mist swallowing him as he crossed the garden toward the lane. Inside the study, Prothero sat alone, his cigar glowing faintly. The clock ticked towards 6:40, its rhythm steady, oblivious to the tension. Outside, the garden was silent, save for the rustle of leaves in the gathering wind. A shadow moved beyond the window, unnoticed by the colonel, who flipped through his notebook with a scowl. Minutes passed. Leonard reached the church hall, a squat stone building near the green, and found it dark, the door locked. No sign of a leak or anyone waiting. Puzzled, he checked the roofline, but the tiles gleamed intact under his flashlight. A prank, perhaps? Or a misunderstanding? He turned back, unease prickling his spine, and retraced his steps to the vicarage. As he approached, the house was eerily quiet, the parlor light casting a soft glow. Griselda met him at the door, her face pale. "Len, you're back quickly. Is everything all right?" "No one was there," he said, frowning. "The hall's fine. I don't understand." A sharp crack split the air, like a branch snapping underfoot. Leonard froze, his eyes darting to the study door. "What was that?" Griselda's hand flew to her mouth. "It came from your study." Leonard fumbled with his keys, his hand shaking as he unlocked the door. He pushed it open, and the sight stopped him cold. Colonel Prothero slumped over the desk, his cigar smoldering on the rug, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. Blood pooled beneath him, glinting in the lamplight. A pistol lay on the floor, its barrel gleaming dully. "Griselda, stay back!" Leonard's voice was hoarse. He stepped forward, his heart pounding, and checked for a pulse. Nothing. Prothero's eyes stared blankly, his notebook still open to a page of damning figures. Griselda clutched his arm, her voice trembling. "Len, how? The door was locked. You locked it." "I know," he whispered, staring at the scene. "The window was shut, the latch secure. No one could enter or leave. Yet the colonel was dead, the gunshot still echoing in their ears." Leonard stumbled to the telephone, dialing the police station with numb fingers. "Inspector Slack, please. It's urgent. There's been a murder." As he spoke, Griselda sank into a chair, her eyes wide with shock. The clock on the desk read 6:50, its hands frozen, as if time itself had paused to mark the moment. Outside, the village slept, unaware of the storm breaking within the vicarage. The mist swirled, hiding secrets in its folds, but the truth, Leonard knew, would not stay hidden long. The fatal appointment had ended in death, and the locked door held its secrets tightly. For now.
Chapter 4. Shadows of Suspicion. The vicarage, once a haven of quiet sermons and afternoon teas, now pulsed with the grim energy of a crime scene. The clock in Leonard Clement's study stood frozen at 6:50 p.m., its hands a silent witness to the moment Colonel Lucius Prothero's life ended.
The air was heavy, with the metallic tang of blood and the faint whiff of cigar smoke curling like a ghost from the rug where the colonel's body still lay, untouched until the police could document the scene. Outside, the mist had thickened into a drizzle, cloaking St. Mary Mead in a damp shroud that mirrored the village's sudden unease. Inspector Slack, a wiry man with a bulldog's tenacity and a penchant for barking orders, arrived with a clatter of boots and a scowl that could curdle milk. His notebook was already open, his pencil poised like a weapon. "Right, Clement," he snapped, striding into the study. "Walk me through it, and don't leave out a single detail." Leonard, his face ashen, stood by the desk, his hands clasped to keep them from trembling. Griselda hovered near the door, her usual vivacity dimmed by shock. "It was just after 6:30, Leonard began, his voice steady but strained. "Prothero came to discuss the church accounts. We argued. He accused me of mismanaging funds. Then I got a phone call about a leak at the church hall. I left him here, locked the door, and went to check. When I returned, he was like this." Slack's eyes narrowed, sweeping the room. The locked window, the pistol on the floor, the blood pooling beneath Prothero's slumped form. "Locked, you say? And you've got the only key?" "Yes," Leonard said, producing the key from his pocket. "I always lock the study when I leave. Habit." Slack grunted, scribbling furiously. "Convenient. You argue, you leave, and he's shot dead in a locked room. Sounds like a neat trick, Vicar." Griselda bristled, stepping forward. "That's absurd. Len wouldn't hurt a fly. Someone else was here. Someone must have—" "Must have what?" Slack interrupted, his gaze pinning her. "The door was locked, Mrs. Clement. No signs of forced entry. Your husband's the one with motive and opportunity." Leonard's jaw tightened, but before he could retort, a soft knock sounded at the front door. Griselda hurried to answer it, returning with Miss Jane Marple, her lavender cardigan slightly damp from the rain. Her eyes, bright and unyielding, took in the scene with a quiet intensity, lingering on the pistol and Colonel Prothero's lifeless form. "Miss Marple," Slack said, barely concealing his irritation, "this is a police matter. What brings you back?" "Oh, Inspector, I heard the commotion from my cottage. Such a dreadful thing. I thought I might offer some tea, or perhaps just a pair of ears. Villages, you know, have a way of talking." She settled into a corner chair, her knitting bag at her feet, and began to work her needles, the soft click a counterpoint to the room's tension. Slack snorted, but turned back to Leonard. "Right. Who else was in the house? Servants? Visitors?" "No one," Griselda said firmly. "Just us. And Prothero." "And this phone call," Slack pressed. "Who was it?" Leonard shook his head. "The voice was muffled, low. They hung up before I could ask more." Slack's pencil paused, his eyes glinting. "Muffled, eh? Sounds like a setup. You sure you didn't stage this, Clement? Get called away, slip back, do the deed?" "That's enough," Griselda snapped, her cheeks flushing. "You have no right to accuse him without evidence." Slack's lip curled, but he shifted focus, crouching to examine the pistol. "Looks like a service revolver. Prothero's, maybe? We'll check for prints." He called to a constable outside, who began dusting the weapon and the desk, the powder drifting like ash in the lamplight. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze flicking to the window. "Inspector, have you checked the garden? The ground soft from the rain. Footprints might tell a story." Slack shot her a look, but nodded to the constable. "Check it, though I doubt we'll find anything. This screams inside job." He turned to Leonard. "You stay put, Vicar. Don't leave the village." As Slack barked orders to his men, Leonard sank into a chair, his face a mask of despair. Griselda knelt beside him, whispering reassurances, but her eyes were wide with fear. Miss Marple, still knitting, watched the room like a hawk, her mind cataloging every detail. The cigar's smoldering end, the untouched ledgers, the faint creak of the floorboards under Slack's boots. The police worked through the evening, photographing the scene and sealing the study. By 9 o'clock, Prothero's body was removed, the stretcher's wheels creaking as it rolled through the hall. Slack lingered, his notebook now bulging with notes. "We'll need statements from everyone who saw Prothero today, starting with you two, and anyone else who had a grudge." "That's half the village," Griselda muttered, earning a sharp glance from Slack. "Then I'll talk to half the village. Someone wanted him dead, and I'll find them." As Slack left to organize his men, Miss Marple rose, her knitting tucked away. "Vicar, Mrs. Clement, try to rest. This is a terrible shock, but clarity comes with morning." Her tone was gentle, but her eyes held a glint of purpose as she stepped into the night. The drizzle had stopped, leaving the village slick and gleaming under the street lamps. Miss Marple paused by the vicarage gate, her gaze sweeping the garden. The constable's flashlight bobbed in the distance, but she needed no light to see the patterns forming in her mind. Prothero's death was no random act. It was a thread pulled from a tightly woven web of village secrets. The next morning, St. Mary Mead buzzed with whispers, the news of the murder spreading like wildfire. At the tea shop, Mrs. Price held court, her voice carrying over clinking cups. "Shut in a locked room! Can you imagine? And poor Vicar Clement caught in the middle. I always said Prothero was trouble. Mark my words, he pushed someone too far." Miss Marple, sipping tea at a corner table, listened without comment. Her eyes drifted to the window where Anne Prothero passed by, her face pale and drawn. Anne's green coat was buttoned tightly, her steps hurried as she headed toward the churchyard. Moments later, Lawrence Redding appeared, his paint-stained jacket slung over one shoulder, his expression guarded. He caught Anne's eye, and they exchanged a brief, tense nod before parting ways. Miss Marple set her tea down, her mind racing. The tea party, the letter in the mist, now this. Anne and Lawrence were entwined in something deeper than village gossip. She paid her bill and strolled toward the vicarage, where Griselda was sweeping the front path, her movements brisk, but her eyes red-rimmed. "Miss Marple!" Griselda exclaimed, leaning on her broom. "It's awful, isn't it? Slack's got it in for Len. He's been poking around all morning asking for enemies, as if Len would shoot anyone." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. "The inspector's thorough, my dear, but he's looking for a story that fits his suspicions. Sometimes the truth is quieter." She hesitated, then added, "I noticed Anne Prothero and Mr. Redding just now. They seemed preoccupied." Griselda's eyes widened. "Oh, she's been a wreck since yesterday, and Lawrence, well, he's always brooding, isn't he? But you don't think—" She trailed off, her hand tightening on the broom. "I think nothing yet," Miss Marple said, her tone light but her eyes sharp, "only that people's hearts are often louder than their words." As Griselda returned to her sweeping, Miss Marple wandered toward the church where Slack was questioning villagers. She found him by the lich gate, grilling Archer, the poacher, whose weathered face was set in a scowl. "I told you, Inspector. I was in my shack all evening. Didn't see Prothero, didn't shoot him. Why would I?" Slack jabbed a finger. "Because he was evicting you. That's why. Motive enough for most." Archer spat on the ground. "He threatened, sure, but I ain't no killer. Check my shack. Nothing there but snares and a bottle of gin." Miss Marple, lingering nearby, noted Archer's clenched fists, the way his eyes flicked toward the woods. She approached as Slack moved on to question Dr. Haydock, who was polishing his glasses with nervous precision. "Good morning, Doctor," she said, her smile disarming. "Such a dreadful business. I suppose you were busy with patients yesterday evening." Haydock started, his glasses nearly slipping. Yes, Miss Marple. A home call. Mrs. Baxter's bronchitis. Kept me out till late." His voice was steady, but his hands betrayed a slight tremor. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking in her mind. How fortunate Mrs. Baxter had you! And the Colonel, such a loss. I heard he was quite forceful about certain matters. Haydock's jaw tightened. He was, always stirring trouble, but I've no part in this if that's what you're hinting. Oh, I never hint. I only wonder. As she left, a constable approached Slack, holding a small evidence bag. Sir, found this in Prothero's coat. A letter. Looks personal.
Slack snatched it, tearing it open. His eyes scanned the page, then widened. Well, well, a love letter. Unsigned, but it's got Anne Prothero's perfume all over it. Meet me tonight. We can't go on like this. Sounds like an affair. Miss Marple, overhearing, kept her expression serene, but her mind raced. The letter Anne posted in the mist? Was this it? Or another? She filed the question away as Slack stormed off to summon Anne and Lawrence. By noon, the village was a cauldron of speculation, but the letter proved a false lead. Anne admitted to writing it, but swore it was meant for a cousin in London, a plea for financial help. Lawrence corroborated her story, claiming he'd only been comforting her as a friend. Slack, frustrated, dismissed the letter as irrelevant, but his suspicions lingered on Leonard. As the day drew to a close, the vicarage stood quiet, the police gone for now. Leonard sat in the parlor, staring at the fire, while Griselda fussed with a tray of tea. Miss Marple, visiting once more, offered a gentle smile. "The truth has a way of rising, Vicar," she said. "Like cream in a churn. Give it time." Leonard nodded, his eyes haunted. "I hope so, Miss Marple, but this shadow, it's heavy." Outside, the village settled into an uneasy dusk, the drizzle returning to blur the street lamps. Miss Marple walked home, her umbrella shielding her from the rain, but not from the questions swirling in her mind. The locked room, the letter, the alibis, each was a piece of a puzzle, and she was determined to find where they fit. For now, the village breathed easier, the immediate shock fading, but the shadows of suspicion lingered, waiting for the next thread to unravel.
Chapter 5. The Artist's Hidden Canvas. The morning after Colonel Prothero's murder, St. Mary Mead awoke to a sky scrubbed clean by the previous night's drizzle, its clarity a stark contrast to the murky suspicions swirling through the village. The vicarage, now cordoned off by police tape, stood like a wounded sentinel, its windows glinting coldly in the sunlight. Miss Jane Marple, ever the unobtrusive observer, stood at her cottage window, her knitting idle in her lap as she watched the village stir. Her mind was a loom, weaving threads from the past days. The tense tea party, Anne Prothero's furtive letter, the locked study, and the love letter that had briefly set tongues wagging. But it was Lawrence Redding, the brooding artist, who now drew her attention. His restless demeanor and quick exit from the tea party hinted at a story untold, and Miss Marple was determined to read it. She set out after breakfast, her straw hat tilted against the sun, her destination Lawrence's studio, a converted barn on the edge of the village, its weathered beams half hidden by wild honeysuckle. The path wound past the churchyard, where a small crowd had gathered, whispering about the murder. Mrs. Price, her basket swinging, was recounting the locked room mystery with theatrical flair. "Shot dead, and not a soul could have got in. It's like something out of a penny dreadful." Miss Marple paused, her smile polite. "Good morning, Mrs. Price. The village is quite abuzz, isn't it? I suppose everyone has a theory." Mrs. Price's eyes gleamed. "Oh, indeed. Some say it's the vicar, though I don't believe it. Others reckoned it's that poacher, Archer, sneaking about. But I heard from Mrs. Baxter that Lawrence Redding was seen near the vicarage last night, looking shifty, and him with his paints and secrets." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Mr. Redding? How curious! Artists do see the world differently, don't they?" She bid Mrs. Price farewell and continued, her steps measured but her mind racing. Lawrence's name kept surfacing, a thread that refused to stay tucked away. She set out after breakfast, her straw hat tilted against the sun, her destination Lawrence's studio, a converted barn on the edge of the village, its weathered beams half hidden by wild honeysuckle. The path wound past the churchyard, where a small crowd had gathered, whispering about the murder. Mrs. Price, her basket swinging, was recounting the locked room mystery with theatrical flair. "Shot dead, and not a soul could have got in. It's like something out of a penny dreadful." Miss Marple paused, her smile polite. "Good morning, Mrs. Price. The village is quite a buzz, isn't it? I suppose everyone has a theory." Mrs. Price's eyes gleamed. "Oh, indeed. Some say it's the vicar, though I don't believe it. Others reckon it's that poacher, Archer, sneaking about. But I heard from Mrs. Baxter that Lawrence Redding was seen near the vicarage last night, looking shifty, and him with his paints and secrets." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Mr. Redding? How curious! Artists do see the world differently, don't they?" She bid Mrs. Price farewell and continued, her steps measured but her mind racing. Lawrence's name kept surfacing, a thread that refused to stay tucked away. The studio door was ajar when she arrived, the scent of turpentine and linseed oil wafting out. Inside, Lawrence stood at an easel, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hands smudged with charcoal. Canvases leaned against the walls, their bold strokes capturing the village's landscapes, and, Miss Marple noted, several sketches of the vicarage, its windows rendered with uncanny detail. One painting, half covered by a cloth, depicted a shadowy figure in a garden, its face obscured, but its posture tense. "Miss Marple," Lawrence said, startled, setting down his charcoal. "Didn't expect visitors. What brings you here?" She smiled, her eyes scanning the room. "Oh, I was passing by and thought I'd see your latest work. You've such a gift for capturing atmosphere. That sketch of the vicarage, it's quite striking." His jaw tightened, but he recovered quickly, tossing a cloth over the canvas. "Just studies, you know. The vicarage has good lines, that's all." "Of course," she said, her tone light, "though it must be unsettling working so close to where poor Colonel Prothero met his end. You were at the tea party, weren't you? Such a dreadful day." Lawrence's eyes flicked to the door, then back to her. "Dreadful, yes. Prothero was not a popular man, but I don't know anything about it. I was here, painting, when it happened." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze lingering on a cluttered table where a box of art supplies stood open. Among the brushes and tubes, she spotted a gap where something cylindrical might have rested, a pistol, perhaps. "You keep a tidy studio," she said, stepping closer, "though I suppose artists misplace things now and then. A brush, a palette knife, or something else." His face hardened, but he forced a laugh. "You're fishing, Miss Marple. I'd got no secrets here, just paint and canvas." She tilted her head, her smile unwavering. "Of course, my dear, my nephew Raymond misplaces things all the time. Pens, keys. Once he lost a whole manuscript. It turned up in the oddest place." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "Well, I mustn't keep you. Your work is so revealing." As she left, Lawrence's expression lingered in her mind, defensive but with a flicker of fear. She made her way to the high street, where the village was alive with activity. Children played near the post office, and Dr. Haydock's bicycle leaned against his clinic wall, its bell glinting. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Anne Prothero, whose pale face and hurried steps had marked her as a woman under strain. The love letter, dismissed by Inspector Slack, was a loose thread, and Miss Marple suspected Anne held its other end. She found Anne at the village shop, selecting apples with a distracted air. Her green coat was buttoned tightly, her eyes shadowed. Miss Marple approached, her basket swinging. "Mrs. Prothero, how nice to see you. I do hope you're managing after such a terrible loss." Anne started, nearly dropping an apple. "Miss Marple, yes, it's been awful. I'm still trying to make sense of it." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her voice soft with sympathy. "Losing a husband is a heavy burden, and with all this talk of letters and alibis, it must be so trying. I heard the inspector found something in the colonel's pocket. Such a curious thing, a letter." Anne's face paled, her fingers tightening on the apple. "It was nothing, a misunderstanding. I told Slack it was for my cousin, about family matters." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle but piercing. "Family matters can be so complicated, can't they? My cousin Clara wrote a letter she regretted, caused quite a stir. But truth has a way of surfacing, like a seed in spring." Anne's lips parted, but no words came. She murmured an excuse and hurried out, leaving Miss Marple to pay for her own purchases. The shopkeeper, a wiry woman named Miss Hartnell, leaned over the counter. "Poor thing's a wreck, and no wonder with that husband of hers. I heard he was cruel, kept her on a tight leash. Wouldn't surprise me if she had secrets." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "People do, don't they? But secrets have a way of speaking." She left the shop, her mind turning to the vicarage, where Leonard and Griselda were grappling with their own shadows. At the vicarage, Inspector Slack had returned, his boots tracking mud across the parlor rug. Leonard sat stiffly, his hands clasped, while Griselda hovered, her usual spark dimmed by the weight of suspicion. Slack was relentless, his questions sharp as knives. "Clement, let's go over it again. You left Prothero alone, locked the door, and came back to find him dead. No one else in the house. Sounds like a fairy tale." Leonard's voice was tight. "It's the truth, Inspector. I don't know how it happened, but I didn't kill him." Slack's eyes glinted. "Then who did? You had motive. Those accusations about the funds and opportunity. That phone call's mighty convenient." Griselda's temper flared. "You're grasping at straws. Len's no murderer. Why aren't you looking at Prothero's enemies? He had plenty." Slack's lip curled. "Oh, I'm looking. Redding's on my list, shifty fellow, and Mrs. Price with her letter. But your husband's the one in the hot seat." A knock at the door interrupted the tense exchange.
Dennis, the vicar's nephew, burst in, his school cap askew, clutching a crumpled envelope. "Uncle Len, I found this in the church vestry, behind the hymnals. It's about the colonel." Slack snatched the envelope, tearing it open. His eyes scanned the single sheet, then widened. "Well, I'll be damned, it's a draft of a will in Prothero's hand. Leaves everything to his daughter, Lettice. Not a penny to Anne, and there's a note, to be finalized tomorrow, dated yesterday." Leonard's face paled. A new will? But why was it in the vestry? Slack's grin was grim. "Good question. Maybe someone didn't want it found. This changes things. Gives Anne a motive, if she knew about it, or Lettice for that matter." Griselda's eyes flashed. "You're jumping to conclusions again. That could belong to anyone. Someone hiding it to stir trouble." Miss Marple, who had arrived quietly during the exchange, stood in the doorway,
her basket now empty of scones. It's so curious," she said, her voice soft. "A will, hidden in the vestry. It's almost as if someone wanted it to be found, eventually." Slack shot her a look. "You again, Miss Marple? Got any theories to share?" She smiled, her needles clicking in her bag. "Oh, I'm just an old woman, Inspector, but I do find it interesting how papers turn up in the oddest places. Like my nephew Raymond's lost receipts, always in plain sight once you know where to look." Slack grunted, pocketing the will. "I'll have this analyzed. Clement, you're still not off the hook, and I'm bringing in Redding and Mrs. Prothero for more questions." As Slack stormed out, Leonard slumped into a chair, his face haggard. "Griselda, this is a nightmare. A will? It makes everything worse." Griselda knelt beside him, her hand on his. "We'll get through this, Len. It's not you they're after, it's the truth." Miss Marple lingered, her gaze drifting to the window, where the garden lay bathed in sunlight. The will was a new thread, pulling suspicion away from Leonard and toward Anne and Lettice. But her mind returned to Lawrence's studio, the missing pistol, the sketch of the vicarage. She recalled a story from her youth, a painter in her village who hid stolen jewels in his canvases, thinking no one would look there. Could Lawrence be hiding something in plain sight? She bid the Clements goodbye and headed toward the church, where the vestry's shadows held their own secrets. Inside, the air was cool and musty, the hymnals stacked neatly, except for one, slightly askew. She lifted it, finding nothing but dust, but her eyes caught a faint scratch on the wooden shelf, a mark, as if something had been dragged across it. A will, perhaps, tucked away in haste. As she left the church, she spotted Lawrence crossing the green, his stride purposeful. He didn't see her, his attention fixed on a small parcel he clutched, wrapped in brown paper. He slipped into an alley behind the post office, and Miss Marple, her curiosity piqued, followed at a distant distance. The alley was narrow, lined with bins, and she saw Lawrence pause, glance around, then tuck the parcel into a crevice behind a loose brick. Her heart quickened, but she kept her distance, returning to the high street as if nothing had happened. The parcel could be innocent, sketches perhaps, or supplies, but her instincts whispered otherwise. She made a mental note to watch the alley, perhaps enlist Dennis's sharp eyes to keep tabs. By evening, the village was alight with fresh gossip, the will, the letter, the locked room. At the tea shop, Mrs. Price was in her element, spinning theories about Anne's inheritance and Lawrence's temper. Miss Marple listened, her tea cooling, her mind sifting through the noise. The will had shifted the spotlight, giving Leonard a momentary reprieve, but the truth was still a shadow, flitting just out of reach. As she walked home, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the green. The village settled into a fragile calm, the day's revelations tucked away like the will in the vestry. Miss Marple paused at her gate, her eyes lingering at the vicarage, where Leonard's silhouette moved behind the parlor curtains. The artist's hidden canvas was beginning to take shape.
Chapter 6. Echoes from the Graveyard. The moon hung low over St. Mary Mead, its pale light filtering through a lattice of bare branches, casting skeletal shadows across the churchyard. The village slept, its cottages dark and shuttered, but Miss Jane Marple was awake, her lavender cardigan swapped for a dark shawl as she slipped out of her cottage. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp moss and fallen leaves, and her steps were silent on the dew-soaked grass. She wasn't one for midnight strolls, but something about the day's discoveries, the hidden will, Lawrence Redding's secretive parcel, the persistent whispers of village grudges had stirred her curiosity into restless motion. The churchyard, she sensed, held more than old bones and weathered stones. The iron gate creaked softly as she entered, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. The gravestones leaned like silent sentinels, their inscriptions blurred by time and lichen. She moved toward the older section, where ancient yews loomed, their gnarled roots clawing at the earth. Her destination wasn't random. Mrs. Price's gossip about Archer, the poacher, had lingered in her mind. His shack bordered the churchyard, and tales of his feud with Colonel Prothero, threats of eviction, bitter words, had painted him as a man with a motive. Miss Marple, ever attuned to the village's pulse, wondered what secrets the night might reveal. As she neared the boundary hedge, a faint scraping sound broke the silence, like metal on earth. She froze, her heart quickening, and peered through the yew's twisted branches. There, crouched beside a crumbling headstone, was Archer, his wiry frame hunched over a patch of disturbed soil. A shovel glinted in his hand, its blade biting into the ground with deliberate care. The moonlight caught his weathered face, etched with a mix of determination and fear. Miss Marple's breath caught, but she remained still, her lavender shawl blending with the shadows. Archer was no gravedigger, yet here he was, digging in the dead of night. Was he hiding something, or searching for it? She recalled a story from her youth of a poacher in her village who buried stolen silver in a churchyard, thinking it safe from prying eyes. Could Archer be doing the same? He paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and muttered to himself, his voice low but audible. "Damn you, Prothero, even dead you're trouble." He thrust the shovel deeper, the earth yielding with a soft thud. Miss Marple's mind raced, piecing together fragments. Prothero's threat to evict Archer, the will found in the vestry, the locked study. Was Archer hiding evidence, or something more personal? She edged closer, careful to stay hidden, when a twig snapped under her foot. The sound was faint, but Archer's head whipped around, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Who's there?" he growled, gripping the shovel like a weapon. His voice was rough, laced with panic. Miss Marple held her breath, pressing against the yew. After a tense moment, Archer shook his head, muttering, "Bloody foxes," and resumed his work. She exhaled silently, her mind cataloging the scene. Whatever Archer was doing, it was no innocent errand. She made a mental note to revisit the spot by daylight, when the police might be persuaded to take a look. As she retreated, the church clock struck midnight, its chimes rolling across the village like a warning. She slipped back through the gate, her shawl catching on a thorn, and made her way home, the night's secrets tucked into her thoughts like stitches in her knitting. Sleep would wait. Her mind was too alive with questions. Morning brought a bustle to St. Mary Mead, the village abuzz with the murder's aftermath. Inspector Slack had set up a makeshift headquarters in the village hall, his constables fanning out to collect statements. Leonard Clement, still pale from the ordeal, faced another round of questions at the vicarage, where Griselda fussed over a teapot, her usual cheer strained by the weight of suspicion. Miss Marple, after a light breakfast, decided to visit the vicarage, her basket now filled with a jar of gooseberry jam, as an excuse. She found Leonard in the parlor, his prayer book open but unread, his eyes distant. Griselda greeted her with a weary smile. "Miss Marple, you're a godsend. Len's barely eaten since, well, you know." Leonard looked up, his voice hollow. "It's not just Slack's questions. It's the village. Everyone's looking at me like I'm guilty. And that will in the vestry, it's made things worse." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her gaze gentle but piercing. "The will does complicate things, doesn't it? Such a curious place to hide it. I wonder if someone meant to stir trouble, or divert it. She paused, stirring her tea. Vicar, you've known Colonel Prothero a long time. Did he ever mention anything personal? Something that might explain why someone would go to such lengths? Leonard frowned, rubbing his temples. He was a hard man, never shared much beyond complaints. But last month he mentioned a debt. Someone owed him money, and he was furious about it. Wouldn't say who, just that he'd see them pay, one way or another. Griselda's eyes widened. You never told me that. Who could it be? Archer, maybe? He's always scraping by. Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. Archer is a possibility, certainly. He's had his troubles with the colonel. But debts come in many forms. Money, promises, secrets. She sipped her tea, her mind flashing to the churchyard, Archer's shovel glinting in the moonlight. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Dennis, the vicar's nephew, burst in, his cheeks flushed from running. Uncle Len, I overheard something at the post office. Mrs. Hartnell was saying she saw Archer near the vicarage the night of the murder, carrying a sack. Looked heavy, she said. Leonard's face tightened. Archer? But why would he? Gossip travels fast, Miss Marple said softly, her eyes on Dennis. Thank you, my dear. You've sharp ears. Did Mrs. Hartnell say anything else? Dennis shrugged, kicking at the rug. Just that Archer looked scared, like he was running from something. She thought it was odd, him being out so late. Griselda's hand flew to her mouth. Len, do you think he could have... Let's not jump to conclusions, Miss Marple said, her tone calm but firm. Gossip is like a breeze, useful for direction, but not always truth. Still, it's worth noting. She rose, smoothing her skirt. I must be off, but do let me know if anything else turns up. Villages, you know, are full of surprises. She left the vicarage and headed toward the churchyard, her steps purposeful. The morning sun had burned away the mist, revealing the gravestones in sharp relief. She found the spot where Archer had been digging, now smoothed over but marked by a faint disturbance in the soil. Cairning, she brushed away leaves, revealing a shallow scrape, as if something had been buried in haste. She didn't dig, better to leave that to the police, but she noted the headstone's inscription, Eleanor Grayson, 1852 to 1890. An old name, unconnected to the present, but the choice of location intrigued her. As she stood, a shadow fell across the path. Archer, himself, his cap pulled low, stood watching her, his shovel nowhere in sight. His eyes were wary, his voice gruff. Miss Marple, what you doin' pokin' about here? She smiled, undaunted. Oh, just admiring the old stones. Such history in a churchyard, don't you think? Though it must be peaceful at night, perfect for reflection. Archer's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists. I ain't no peace with Prothero's ghost hanging about. You saw something, didn't you, last night? Miss Marple halted her breath, but her face remained serene. Last night? Why, I was tucked in bed, Mr. Archer. But if you've got something to share, I'm all ears. My nephew Raymond once buried a treasure box as a boy. Caused quite a stir when it was found. Archer's eyes narrowed, but he backed away. I ain't got nothing to say. Just leave me be. He turned and strode towards his shack, his steps heavy with unease. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind racing. Archer's digging was no idle act, but was it connected to the murder? She decided to alert Inspector Slack, choosing her words carefully to avoid accusing without proof. At the village hall, she found him poring over a map of the vicarage grounds, his face etched
etched with frustration. "Miss Marple," he grunted, barely looking up, "unless you've got a signed confession, I'm busy." She smiled, unruffled. "Oh, nothing so dramatic, Inspector. But I was in the churchyard this morning and noticed some disturbed soil near Eleanor Grayson's grave. It might be nothing, a fox, perhaps, but with all that's happened—" Slack's eyes sharpened. "Disturbed soil? Why didn't you say so sooner?" He barked at a constable to check the spot, then turned back to her. "You're everywhere, aren't you? What else have you seen?" "Only what the village shows me," she said, her tone mild. "But I did hear Mr. Archer was seen near the vicarage the night of the murder, carrying a sack, they say." Slack's pencil paused. "Archer, eh? He's been dodging my questions. Time to haul him in." He stormed off, leaving Miss Marple to her thoughts. The afternoon brought a flurry of activity. Slack's men searched the churchyard, finding only a few scraps of twine near the grave, but Archer's shack yielded more. A sack, empty but stained with dirt, hidden under a floorboard. Slack confronted Archer at the edge of the woods, his voice carrying across the green. "Explain this, Archer," he demanded, holding up the sack. "You were digging last night, weren't you? Hiding something?" Archer's face reddened, but he stood his ground. "I was burying snares, that's all. Didn't want the gamekeeper finding 'em. Nothing to do with Prothero." Slack's eyes glinted. "We'll see about that. You're coming with me." As Archer was led away, protesting, Miss Marple watched from a distance, her mind sifting through the day's events. The sack was incriminating, but too vague to tie to the murder. Archer's fear, though, was real, and she wondered what else he might be hiding. Back at the vicarage, Leonard confided in her over tea, his voice low. "Miss Marple, I've been thinking about that phone call, the one that lured me to the church hall. It wasn't just a prank. Someone wanted me out of the way." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes on the steam rising from her cup. "Indeed, Vicar. Timing is everything in such matters, like a clock striking just as the curtain falls." As dusk settled, the village grew quiet, the day's drama subsiding. Archer was released, his alibi shaky but unproven, and the churchyard yielded no further clues. Miss Marple returned home, her shawl wrapped tightly against the evening chill. The echoes from the graveyard lingered, but the mystery remained locked, its key buried somewhere in the village's restless heart.
Chapter 7. The Doctor's Dark Secret. The midday sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a deceptive glow, its warmth doing little to thaw the chill of suspicion that gripped the village. The vicarage murder had cast a long shadow, and every glance, every whisper, carried the weight of unspoken accusations. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat tilted against the glare, made her way toward Dr. Haydock's clinic, a modest brick building tucked behind the village green. The events of the past days, the locked study, the hidden will, Archer's midnight digging, had woven a complex tapestry, and now a new thread tugged at her curiosity. The village physician, whose steady hands and jovial demeanor seemed at odds with the nervous glances she'd caught at the tea party. The clinic's waiting room was quiet, save for the soft rustle of a magazine as Mrs. Baxter, an elderly patient, flipped through its pages. The air smelt of antiseptic and lavender, a blend that spoke of care and concealment. Miss Jane Marple, carrying a small jar of her homemade rosehip syrup as a pretext, smiled at the receptionist, a young woman named Clara. "Good afternoon, Clara. Is Dr. Haydock in? I thought he might appreciate a little something for his tea." Clara's smile was strained, her eyes darting toward the closed consulting room door. "He's with a patient, Miss Marple, but he'll be free soon. It's been hectic with all that's happened." "Of course," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair. "Such a dreadful business with Colonel Prothero. It must be hard for the doctor, being so close to everyone in the village. Clara nodded, her fingers twisting a pencil. He's been run off his feet, and the police, always asking questions. Makes you wonder who you can trust. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. Trust is a fragile thing, isn't it? Like a teacup, sturdy until it's dropped. She paused, glancing at a shelf of medical supplies behind the desk. A glass cabinet held vials and bottles neatly labeled, but one slot was empty, its label smudged. Her mind filed the detail away, a stitch in her growing pattern. The clinic's door opened, and Dr. Haydock emerged, escorting a limping farmer out. His round face, usually creased with a ready smile, was taut, his glasses slipping down his nose. He spotted Miss Marple and managed a nod. "Miss Marple, what a surprise! Not feeling under the weather, I hope." "Oh, no, doctor," she said, rising with her jar. "Just a small gift. Rosehead syrup. Good for the winter chills. I thought you might need a bit of cheer with all this turmoil." Haydock's smile flickered, his hands unsteady as he took the jar. "Kind of you. It's been a trying few days. Step into my office, won't you? I've a moment before my next patient." The office was a study in order, a polished desk, a cabinet of instruments, a framed diploma on the wall. But Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the disarray beneath the surface, a drawers slightly ajar, a stack of papers askew. She settled into a chair, her hands folded over her basket. "You must be exhausted, doctor, tending to the village and answering the inspector's questions. I hear Colonel Prothero was quite, demanding." Haydock's fingers twitched, adjusting his glasses. He was that, always poking into things. Church funds, land disputes, never knew when to let well alone. Miss Marple nodded, her tone gentle. "And yet you trusted him, didn't you? I recall him mentioning your care for his gout last spring. Though I suppose even doctors have their burdens." Haydock's eyes narrowed, but he forced a chuckle. "Burdens? Only the usual, patients who don't follow advice. Prothero was one for ignoring prescriptions." He leaned back, his chair creaking. "But I had nothing to do with his death, if that's what you're getting at." "Oh, I'd never suggest such a thing," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "Though I did hear a whisper, Mrs. Price, you know, about some old trouble. A patient, perhaps, from years ago." Haydock's face stiffened, his hand brushing a vial on his desk, a small empty bottle, its label reading atropine. "Village gossip," he said curtly. "Mrs. Price would spin a tale out of a sneeze. I was at Mrs. Baxter that night, treating her bronchitis. Ask her if you don't believe me." Miss Marple's needles might have been at home, but her mind was knitting furiously. "Of course, doctor. Alibis are such a comfort, aren't they? Like a warm shawl in a storm." She rose, smoothing her skirt. "I mustn't keep you. Patience to see, I'm sure." As she left, the empty vial lingered in her thoughts. Atropine, a poison if misused. She recalled a case from her youth, a doctor in a neighboring village disciplined for a fatal error with a similar drug. Could Prothero have known something about Haydock's past? She filed the question away, her steps carrying her toward the village green, where the day's bustle offered a chance to listen. At the tea shop, the air was thick with speculation. Mrs. Price, presiding over a table of eager listeners, waved Miss Marple over. "You've heard about Archer, I suppose, caught digging in the churchyard. Inspector Slack's sure he's hiding something." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression mild. "Digging, yes, but hiding what? Snares, he says, though one wonders why a poacher would choose a graveyard." Mrs. Price leaned in, her voice dropping. "Mark my words, it's more than snares. And Dr. Haydock, I heard he and Prothero had words last month, something about a medical license? Could be blackmail, if you ask me." Miss Marple's cup paused mid-air. "Blackmail? That's a serious charge, Mrs. Price, though the colonel did have a way of collecting enemies."
As she left the shop, she spotted Anne Prothero crossing the green, her face drawn, her green coat now replaced by a somber gray one. Anne's eyes met hers briefly, then darted away, as if afraid of being read. Miss Marple made a mental note to speak with her later. Anne's silences were as telling as her words. Her next stop was the Vicarage, where Leonard Clement was sorting through a pile of condolence letters, his face etched with exhaustion. Griselda, bustling in with a tray of sandwiches, greeted Miss Marple warmly. "You're a sight for sore eyes. Len's been drowning in paperwork, and Slack's no help, hounding him about that wretched phone call?" Leonard looked up, his eyes hollow. "He's convinced I'm hiding something, Miss Marple, but I've told him everything. The call, the locked door. I even showed him the key. What more does he want?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her hands folded over her basket. "The inspector's thorough, Vicar, but sometimes he only sees what's loudest. That phone call. It's curious, isn't it? Luring you away at just the right moment. Almost as if someone planned it." Griselda's eyes widened. "Planned? You mean someone wanted Len out of the way?" "It's possible," Miss Marple said, her tone measured. "Timing, my dear, is everything in such matters, like a clock striking just as the curtain rises." She paused, her gaze drifting to Leonard. "Vicar, you mentioned Prothero's debts. Did he ever speak of Dr. Haydock in that context?" Leonard frowned, rubbing his chin. "Not directly, no, but he did say something odd once, about a man who thought he could bury his mistakes. I assumed he meant Archer, but now—" Miss Marple's mind hummed. Burying mistakes, Archer's digging, Haydock's tremor, the empty vial. She rose, smoothing her hat. "You've been most helpful, Vicar. I'll leave you to your letters, but do be careful. Secrets have a way of surfacing, like weeds in a garden." As she stepped into the afternoon sun, the village seemed to pulse with hidden currents. Miss Marple decided to visit the church, where the vestry shadows might offer more clues. The door was unlocked, and inside the air was cool, scented with wax and old wood. She examined the shelf where the will had been found, noting a faint smudge of ink on the edge, a careless mark, perhaps from a hurried hand. Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion outside. Inspector Slack's voice boomed across the green, and she hurried to the church porch to see him confronting Dr. Haydock near the war memorial. A small crowd had gathered, their whispers a low hum. "Explain this, Haydock." Slack held up a small glass vial, its label glinting in the sunlight. "Found in your clinic's rubbish bin. Atropine. Empty. Care to tell me why?" Haydock's face paled, his glasses slipping. "It's a standard stock, Inspector. I use it for eye treatments. Must have been discarded by mistake." Slack's eyes narrowed. "Mistake? Or something else? Prothero was shot, sure, but poison's a clever trick. Maybe you dosed him first, slowed him down." Haydock's voice rose, sharp with indignation. "That's preposterous. I was at Mrs. Baxter that night. Ask her if you don't believe me. And atropine's no murder weapon, it's for medical use." Slack's lip curled. "We'll see about that. You're coming with me for a proper chat." The crowd gasped as Haydock was led away, his protests fading into the distance. Miss Marple watched, her mind racing. The vial was damning, but Haydock's alibi was solid.
Mrs. Baxter had confirmed his visit, yet the tremor in his hands, the smudged label, suggested a man with something to hide. She recalled Prothero's mention of a debt. Could it have been leverage over Haydock, a past mistake held over his head? She made her way to Mrs. Baxter's cottage, a tidy dwelling with lace curtains. The elderly woman, bundled in shawls, welcomed her with a cough and a smile. "Miss Marple, come to check on my bronchitis?" "Just a neighborly visit," Miss Marple said, offering a biscuit from her basket. "Though I did hear Dr. Haydock was here the night of the murder. Such a dedicated man." Mrs. Baxter nodded, sipping tea. "Oh, yes, he was here till nearly 8. Gave me a new tonic, worked wonders. Poor man, caught up in this mess. Miss Marple's smile didn't waver, but her mind noted the timing. Haydock's alibi held, covering the murder's window. Yet the vial nagged at her, a loose thread in a tightening web. She thanked Mrs. Baxter and left, her steps carrying her back to the green, where the village was settling into evening. At the tea shop, the mood was electric, the atropine discovery fueling fresh theories. Mrs. Price, waving a scone, declared, "I knew it. Haydock's got a past. Prothero must have found out. Blackmail, that's what it was." Miss Marple listened, her tea cooling, her thoughts elsewhere. The vial, the will, Archer's digging, each was a piece, but the puzzle's shape eluded her. She returned home as the sun dipped, casting long shadows across her garden. The village was quiet, the day's drama resolved for now with Haydock's release, his alibi unshaken. But Miss Marple knew better. The doctor's dark secret, whatever it was, lingered like a shadow, waiting for the light to expose it.
Chapter 8. Tangled Threads of Deceit. The village of St. Mary Mead shimmered under a late summer sun, its cobblestone lanes and thatched cottages belying the dark currents swirling beneath the surface. The murder of Colonel Lucius Prothero had unraveled the village's quiet facade, and each new revelation, the hidden will, Archer's midnight digging, Dr. Haydock's empty vial, tightened the knot of suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat casting a soft shadow, strolled toward the village hall, where a fete was in full swing, its cheerful chaos a stark contrast to the grim whispers of the past week. The fete, with its bunting and laughter, was the perfect stage for secrets to slip, and Miss Marple's sharp eyes were ready to catch them. The hall's lawn buzzed with activity. Children darted between stalls, clutching toffee apples, while villagers bartered over homemade jams and knitted scarves. A brass band played a jaunty tune, its notes clashing with the undercurrent of gossip. Mrs. Price, stationed at a cake stall, was regaling a small crowd with tales of the murder. A locked room, a pistol, and now poison vials. It's like a novel, I tell you. And poor Vicar Clement caught in the middle. Miss Marple, pausing to admire a tray of lemon tarts, listened without comment, her mind sifting through the village's tangled threads. The fate was a crucible, drawing suspects together. Anne Prothero, Lawrence Redding, Dr. Haydock, even Archer, who skulked near a tent, his eyes wary. She noted their positions, their glances, the way tension crackled when their paths crossed. Her attention was drawn to a flower stall, where Anne Prothero stood, arranging roses with trembling hands. Her gray dress was somber, but her face was flushed, her eyes darting toward the crowd. Miss Marple approached, her basket swinging lightly. "Mrs. Prothero, what lovely roses! You've a knack for them. A bit of beauty must be a comfort in such trying times." Anne's smile was tight, her fingers brushing a petal. "Thank you, Miss Marple. It's something to do. Keeps my mind off things." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing. "Though it must be hard with all the talk. That letter the inspector found, such a curious thing. And now this will, leaving everything to lettuce? It does stir the imagination." Anne's hand froze, a thorn pricking her finger. She winced, dabbing at the blood with a handkerchief. "The will was a surprise. Lucius never mentioned it. But it's not what people think." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was alert. "People do think the strangest things, don't they? Like my niece Clara, who once misread a letter and caused a dreadful fuss. But truth has a way of blooming, like your roses." Anne's lips parted, but before she could reply, Lawrence Redding appeared, his paint-stained jacket slung over one shoulder.
His dark eyes flicked between them, his voice low. "Anne, all right? The crowd's getting thick." "I'm fine, just helping with the stall." His gaze lingered on Miss Marple, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "Miss Marple, enjoying the fete? Plenty to see, I suppose." "Oh, indeed," she said, her smile serene. "Fates are like mirrors, show you what people want to hide. Your paintings would capture it beautifully, I'm sure." He forced a laugh, steering Anne away. "Maybe I'll try it sometime. Come on, Anne, they need you at the raffle." Miss Marple watched them go, noting the way Anne leaned into Lawrence, their steps synchronized but tense. She wandered toward the raffle tent, where Griselda Clement was selling tickets, her auburn curls bouncing as she chatted with villagers. Leonard, nearby, manned a bookstall, his face drawn but his smile brave. Miss Marple approached, offering a jar of her blackberry jam. "Griselda, Vicar, you're both doing splendidly," she said, setting the jar down. "The fate is a bright spot in a dark week." Griselda's eyes sparkled, though exhaustion lingered beneath. "It's a distraction, at least. Len's been a rack with slack breathing down his neck, and now this talk of a will. Everyone's pointing fingers at Anne." Leonard glanced up, his voice low. "It's unfair, Miss Marple. Anne's grieving, and slack is making it worse. He was here earlier asking about her and Lawrence. Said they were seen together too often." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Together? Well, villages do notice such things. Though I wonder if it's more than friendship. People's hearts are so unpredictable." Before Griselda could reply, a commotion erupted near the cider tent. Inspector Slack's voice cut through the music, sharp and commanding. "Redding, Mrs. Prothero, a word now." The crowd parted, revealing Slack, his notebook in hand, facing Anne and Lawrence. Anne's face was pale, her hands clasped tightly, while Lawrence stood protective, his jaw set. Miss Marple edged closer, blending with the onlookers, her ears sharp. "What's this about, Inspector?" Lawrence demanded, his voice edged with defiance. "We've answered your questions." "Not enough. I've got witnesses saying you two were at the Vicarage garden the night of the murder, together. Care to explain?" Anne's voice trembled. We were talking about Lucius. I was upset, and Lawrence was kind enough to listen." "Kind, eh? Sounds cozy. And what about this?" He held up a photograph, its edges curling. "Found in Prothero's desk drawer. You two, looking very close at the May Day fair. Doesn't scream just friends to me." The crowd gasped, whispers rippling like wind through grass. Anne's face reddened, but Anne spoke, her voice breaking. "It's not what you think. Lucius was difficult. I needed someone to talk to. That's all." Slack's lip curled. "We'll see. You're both coming to the station, now." As they were led away, the Fates' cheer faltered, the band's tune jarring against the tension. Miss Marple's mind raced, the photograph a new thread in the web. An affair, perhaps, but was it motive enough for murder? She recalled the letter Anne posted, the parcel Lawrence hid, pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit. She wandered to a quiet corner of the lawn, where Lettice Prothero, the colonel's daughter, sat on a bench, her blonde hair catching the sun. Lettice, barely 20, had a dreamy air, her eyes fixed on a sketchbook where she doodled flowers. Miss Marple approached, her basket swinging lightly. "Miss Prothero, what lovely sketch! You've inherited your father's precision, I see." Lettice looked up, her smile faint. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I don't know what to make of all this. The will, Anne, the police. It's too much." Miss Marple sat beside her, her basket at her feet.
It's a heavy burden, my dear. A will can change so much. Did you know your father planned to leave everything to you? Lettuce's pencil paused, her eyes clouding. Not until the police told me. Father was secretive. He never talked about money. But Anne, she's been so strange lately, always whispering with Lawrence. Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her mind was alert. Whispering can mean many things, like my niece Mabel, who planned a surprise party and caused all sorts of misunderstandings. Maybe Anne was seeking comfort. Lettuce shrugged, her voice bitter. Maybe, but Father didn't trust her. He said she was reckless, spending too much. I think he changed the will to punish her. Miss Marple filed the comment away, her thoughts turning to the vicarage. She decided to visit Leonard and Griselda, hoping to glean more from their perspective. At the vicarage, she found them in the parlor, the air heavy with worry. Griselda was pacing, her scarf trailing, while Leonard stared at a letter, its wax seal broken. "Miss Marple," Griselda exclaimed, relief softening her features. "You've heard about Anne and Lawrence. Slack is convinced they're guilty, but it's nonsense. They're not killers." Leonard set the letter down, his face grim. "It's more than that, Griselda. This came today. An anonymous note. Says Prothero was seeing someone, a woman from out of town. If it's true, it could explain the will." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. "An anonymous note? How intriguing. May I see it?" Leonard hesitated, then handed it over. The paper was cheap, the handwriting scrawled. Prothero had a mistress. Check the Rose and Crown in Melchester. No signature.
Just a smudge of ink. Miss Marple's mind hummed. Another thread, perhaps a false one, meant to mislead. "It's vicious," Griselda said, her voice shaking. "Someone's trying to ruin Anne, or worse." Miss Marple nodded, her tone calm. "Or to distract. Anonymous notes are like shadows. Hard to trust. But the Rose and Crown, that's worth noting." She paused, her eyes on Leonard. "Vicar, you were lured away that night. Have you remembered anything more about the caller's voice?" Leonard shook his head. It was muffled, like they were covering the receiver, but it was deliberate. "I'm sure of it." Before Miss Marple could reply, a cry echoed from the hall. Griselda rushed out, followed by Leonard and Miss Marple, to find Dennis, his face white, clutching a crumpled scarf. "I found it in the garden, near the study window," he stammered. "It's Griselda's, but I swear I saw someone drop it that night." Griselda gasped, snatching the scarf, a bright blue silk, unmistakable. "This is mine, but I wasn't in the garden. I was in the parlor all evening." Leonard's face paled. "Then how?" Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, examining the scarf. A faint stain, like mud, marked its edge. "Curious," she said softly. "It's almost as if someone wanted it found, like a clue planted in a play." Dennis's voice trembled. "I saw a shadow, Uncle Len, moving fast toward the woods. I thought it was a cat, but now—" Slack's arrival cut the moment short, his boots thudding as he stormed in. "Clement, what's this about a scarf? More tricks?" He seized it, his eyes glinting. "Yours, Mrs. Clement? Care to explain why it's in the murder scene?" Griselda's temper flared. "I didn't drop it. Someone's framing me. Or Len. You're chasing the wrong people, Inspector." Slack's jaw tightened, but Miss Marple stepped forward, her tone calm. "Inspector, might I suggest checking the scarf for prints? If it was dropped deliberately, it could point to someone else." Slack grunted, bagging the scarf. "I'll check it. But this doesn't clear you, Mrs. Clement, or your husband." As he left, Griselda collapsed into a chair, tears welling. "It's a lie, Miss Marple. I'd never hurt anyone, but someone's trying to ruin us." Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind racing. There, my dear. Lies unravel given time, like a poorly knit sweater."
She rose, her thoughts turning to the anonymous note, the scarf, the affair. Each was a thread, tangled but leading somewhere. The fate wound down as dusk fell, the village settling into an uneasy quiet. Anne and Lawrence were released, their alibis shaky but unproven, and Griselda's scarf became the latest fuel for gossip. Miss Marple walked home, her umbrella tapping the path, her mind weaving the day's events into a pattern. The tangled threads of deceit were tightening, but the truth, she knew, was close, waiting for the right tug to unravel it all.
Chapter 9. The Clock's Ticking Revelation. The late afternoon sun cast a golden sheen over St. Mary Mead, its rays filtering through the vicarage's ancient oaks, painting dappled patterns on the lawn. The village, though outwardly serene, thrummed with the restless energy of a community teetering on the edge of truth. Colonel Prothero's murder had woven a web of suspicion, and each new clue, the hidden will, the empty atropine vial, Griselda's scarf, tightened its strands. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat slightly askew, stood in her garden, her gaze fixed on the vicarage's study window. The locked room, the gunshot, the mysterious phone call, they were pieces of a puzzle, and she sensed the key lay in the smallest detail, time itself. Her attention turned to the vicarage clock, a sturdy oak piece that had ticked relentlessly through the night of the murder, its hands frozen at 6:50 p.m. when Leonard Clement found Prothero's body. The police had dismissed it as a quirk, but Miss Marple's mind lingered on its significance. Clocks, she knew, were more than timekeepers. They were witnesses, silent but unerring. She recalled a case from her youth where a tampered clock had misled an entire investigation, and she wondered if history was repeating itself. She set out for the vicarage, her basket empty, save for a small notebook where she jotted observations. The village was quiet, the fate's excitement faded, but whispers of Griselda's scarf and Anne Prothero's rumored affair lingered like smoke. At the vicarage, she found Leonard in the parlor, sorting through a stack of parish records, his face etched with worry. Griselda, unusually subdued, was polishing silver, her movements mechanical. "Miss Marple," Griselda exclaimed, setting down a candlestick. "You're a beacon in this storm. Slack's been here again, poking about that scarf. He's convinced I'm involved, but I swear I wasn't in the garden." Leonard looked up, his eyes weary. "It's not just the scarf. He's digging into my past now. Every sermon, every shilling. I feel like a hunted man." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her smile gentle, but her gaze sharp. "It's a trying time, Vicar, but sometimes the smallest things hold the truth. That clock in your study, for instance, such a fine piece. Was it always so reliable?" Leonard frowned, caught off guard. "The clock? It's old, but it keeps good time. Why do you ask?" "Oh, just a fancy," she said, her tone light. "My nephew Raymond once had a clock that ran slow, caused all sorts of confusion. I'd love to see yours if you don't mind." Griselda led her to the study, now cleared of police tape, but heavy with the memory of death. The clock stood on the desk, its hand still at 6:50, though the mechanism had been wound since. Miss Marple examined it, her fingers brushing the oak casing. She noticed a faint scratch near the winding key, as if it had been forced. "Curious," she murmured, tilting the clock. A small panel at the back, barely visible, was loose. She pressed it, and it sprang open, revealing a coiled spring, slightly bent. "Vicar," she said, her voice calm but urgent, "this clock's been tampered with. The spring's misaligned. It would stop at a set time, not by chance." Leonard's eyes widened. "Tampered?
But why? Griselda's hand flew to her mouth. To make it look like the murder happened when Len was gone. That phone call. It was a trick to get him out. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Exactly, my dear. The clock was set to mislead. 6:50 when you returned, Vicar. But the murder could have happened earlier, giving someone time to slip away. Leonard's face paled. Then the killer was here before I left, or after. But the door was locked. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Locks, like clocks, can be persuaded. I wonder if we might check the garden again. Those footprints Slack found were inconclusive, but there's more to see. They stepped outside, the lawn soft from recent rain. Miss Marple scanned the ground near the study window, her gaze settling on a patch of mud under a rose bush. The police had noted shallow prints, but she spotted something new. A faint impression, not of a shoe, but of a heel, sharp and narrow, as if someone had stood there briefly. Nearby, a twig was snapped, its break fresh. Someone was here, she said, pointing. Not heavy enough for a man, perhaps. A woman's heel, maybe? Griselda's eyes widened. Anne? She was at the fete, acting so strange. But why would she... Miss Marple's tone was measured. Let's not leap, my dear. Footprints are like gossip, suggestive, but not proof. We need more. Her thoughts turned to the woods beyond the vicarage, a dense tangle of oaks and brambles that bordered Archer's shack. The killer, she reasoned, might have fled that way, using the trees for cover. She decided to investigate, but not alone. She enlisted Dennis, the vicar's nephew, whose sharp eyes and boundless energy made him an ideal ally. Dennis, she said, finding him kicking a ball near the church, I've a task for you. The woods behind the vicarage. Could you take a look? Not too close to Archer's shack, mind, but see if anything catches your eye. A bit of cloth, a dropped item, anything odd. Dennis's face lit up, thrilled at the prospect of adventure. Like a detective? I'm on it, Miss Marple. He dashed off, his cap bouncing. While Dennis scoured the woods, Miss Marple visited the village shop, where Miss Hartnell was sorting letters, her face pinched with curiosity. Miss Marple, you've heard about the scarf. Poor Griselda's in a state. And now they're saying the clock was off. Can you believe it? Miss Marple smiled, selecting a tin of biscuits. Clocks can be tricky things, Miss Hartnell. Like people, they don't always tell the truth. Have you noticed anyone unusual near the vicarage lately? Someone out of place? Miss Hartnell leaned over the counter, her voice dropping. Well, I shouldn't say, but I saw Mrs. Lestrange near the vicarage 2 nights ago, before the murder. She was just standing there, staring at the windows. Odd for a newcomer. Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted. Mrs. Lestrange, how interesting. She keeps to herself, doesn't she? Like my cousin Clara, who moved to a new town and caused quite a stir without saying a word. As she left the shop, her mind turned to Mrs. Lestrange, the enigmatic widow whose black silk dresses and guarded smiles had intrigued her since the tea party. Could she be connected to the heel print, the tampered clock? Miss Marple decided to pay her a visit, armed with a pretext, a borrowed gardening book she claimed to be returning. Mrs. Lestrange's cottage was a neat affair, its windows curtained, its garden pristine. She answered the door, her dark eyes wary but polite. Miss Marple, what a surprise! Come in. Tea? Oh, no, thank you, Miss Marple said, holding up the book. I just thought you might like this back. Such a lovely garden you have. I saw you near the vicarage the other night, admiring the roses, perhaps. Mrs. Lestrange's smile tightened, her fingers brushing her locket. The vicarage? Oh, I walk that way sometimes. The evening air, you know. "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "Though it's a curious place to wonder with all that's happened. The clock, for instance, so strange, stopping like that." Mrs. Lestrange's hand froze on the locket. "The clock? I wouldn't know. I keep to my own time." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Miss Marple thanked her and left, her mind humming. Mrs. Lestrange's presence near the vicarage was no coincidence, but her role remained unclear. As she reached the village green, Dennis raced up, breathless, clutching a small object, a woman's glove, black leather, its cuff embroidered with a delicate L. "Found it in the woods," he panted, "near the vicarage path. It was caught in a bramble." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "Well done, Dennis. This is most illuminating." The glove, with the telltale initial, pointed to Lestrange, but she cautioned herself against haste. A glove could be planted, like Griselda's scarf, to mislead. She took the glove to Inspector Slack, who was at the village hall, poring over a timeline of the murder night. His scowl softened at the sight of the glove. "Where'd you get this, Miss Marple? And don't tell me it fell from the sky." She smiled, handing it over. "Young Dennis found it in the woods, near the vicarage path. It might mean nothing, but I
Thought you'd want to see it. Slack turned it over, noting the embroidery. Lestrange, eh? She's been slippery, that one. Claims she was home all evening, but no one can confirm it. I'll have a word." As Slack stormed off, Miss Marple returned to the vicarage, where Leonard and Griselda were grappling with the latest news. The tampered clock had shifted suspicion, but Slack's focus remained on Leonard, the glove now adding Mrs. Lestrange to his list. Griselda, her eyes red, clutched a teacup. "It's one thing after another, Miss Marple. First my scarf, now this glove. Someone's playing a cruel game." Leonard nodded, his voice low. "The clock changes everything. If it was set to stop, the killer had time to escape before I returned. But who?" Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the window, where the garden lay bathed in fading light. "Someone clever, Vicar. Someone who knows the value of time. Like a gardener planting seeds for spring, they've sown confusion." As evening fell, the village settled into a fragile calm. Mrs. Lestrange, questioned by Slack, denied owning the glove, her alibi unproven but unshaken. The glove joined the scarf in evidence, a tantalizing clue that led nowhere. Miss Marple walked home, her umbrella tapping the path, her mind weaving the day's discoveries. The tampered clock, the heel print, the glove. Each was a step closer to the truth, but the killer remained a shadow, flitting through the woods of St. Mary Mead, their trail marked by time's ticking deception. Chapter 10. Unmasking the Culprit. The twilight sky over St. Mary Mead was a tapestry of indigo and gold, its fading light casting long shadows across the vicarage lawn. The village, weary from days of suspicion and whispered accusations, seemed to hold its breath as Miss Jane Marple prepared for the final act in the drama of Colonel Lucius Prothero's murder. The clues had piled like autumn leaves: a tampered clock, a hidden will, a dropped glove, a buried sack, and a web of motives spun from greed, fear, and forbidden love. Tonight, in the vicarage's somber parlor, Miss Marple would weave those threads into a truth that would lay the mystery to rest. She had requested a gathering, her note to Inspector Slack coached in polite urgency, suggesting that a few key figures, Leonard and Griselda Clement, and Lettice Prothero, Lawrence Redding, Dr. Haydock, and Mrs. Lestrange, join them to clarify matters. Slack, though skeptical of her meddling, had agreed, his patience worn thin by dead ends. The parlor was arranged with care. Chairs in a semicircle, a fire crackling in the hearth, and a single lamp casting a warm glow over the faces soon to assemble. Miss Marple stood by the window, her lavender cardigan a soft contrast to the tension in the air.
her knitting bag at her feet like a silent ally. The guests arrived one by one, their expressions a mix of curiosity and dread. Leonard, his clerical collar slightly askew, gripped Griselda's hand, her auburn curls subdued under a dark scarf. Anne Prothero entered, her face pale but composed, her gray dress clinging to her like armor. Lettice, her blonde hair loose, hovered near her stepmother, her eyes darting nervously. Lawrence Redding slouched in, his paint-stained fingers restless, while Dr. Haydock adjusted his glasses with a forced smile. Mrs. Lestrange, in black silk, was last, her locket gleaming as she took a seat with measured grace. Inspector Slack stood by the fireplace, his notebook open, his scowl a permanent fixture. "Right, Miss Marple, you've got us here. What's this about? I've got a murderer to catch, not time for parlor games." Miss Marple's smile was serene, her blue eyes sharp as she faced the room. "No games, Inspector. Only the truth, which, like a good stitch, holds when pulled tight. Colonel Prothero's death has troubled us all, but tonight we'll unravel the knot." She paused, letting the silence settle. "Let's begin with the night of the murder. A locked study, a single gunshot, a clock stopped at 6:50. But, as we've learned, time can be persuaded." Leonard shifted, his voice low. "The clock was tampered with. You said so yourself, Miss Marple. It stopped before I returned." She nodded, her hands folded. "Indeed, Vicar. The clock was set to stop, creating a false timeline. The murder happened earlier, perhaps closer to 6:30, when you were lured away by that mysterious phone call. A clever ruse to ensure you were absent." Griselda's eyes widened. "Then someone planned it all? The call, the clock, everything?" Miss Marple's gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. "Exactly, my dear. But who? Let's consider the clues. A pistol, missing from Lawrence Redding's studio, found at the scene. A will, hidden in the vestry, cutting Anne from her inheritance. A glove, embroidered with L, found in the woods. A scarf, Griselda's, dropped by the study window. And an empty atropine vial tied to Dr. Haydock. Each points to someone, but none tells the whole story." Slack snorted, tapping his notebook. "That's my job, Miss Marple. I've got Redding and Mrs. Prothero in my sights, those love letters, their meetings, and that glove screams Lestrange." Miss Marple's smile didn't waver. "Patience, Inspector. Let's start with the pistol. Mr. Redding, you admitted it was yours, didn't you? Kept in your studio until it vanished." Lawrence's jaw tightened, his voice clipped. "I told you, it was stolen. I hadn't seen it in weeks. Anyone could have taken it." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her tone mild. "But your sketches of the vicarage, such detail, especially the study window, almost as if you studied it closely. And your meetings with Mrs. Prothero, those weren't just friendly chats, were they?" Anne's face flushed, her hands twisting her handkerchief. "I've explained that. Lawrence was a friend, nothing more. I was unhappy. Lucius was cruel, controlling, but I didn't kill him." Lettice's voice broke in, sharp and accusing. "You hated him, Anne. You knew he was changing the will, cutting you out. You wanted his money." Anne's eyes filled with tears. "That's not true. I didn't know about the will until after." Miss Marple raised her hand, her voice calm but commanding. "Let's not rush to judgment. The will is key, but not for the reason you think, Lettice. It was hidden in the vestry, a place few visit. Why there? To be found, I suspect, but not too soon. A distraction, like Griselda's scarf, planted to muddy the waters." Griselda gasped, her hand on Leonard's arm. "Then someone wanted to frame me. But who?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, turning to Dr. Haydock. "Doctor, your alibi is solid. Mrs. Baxter confirmed your visit. But that atropine vial, empty in your bin. Curious, isn't it? Prothero hinted at a past mistake, perhaps a medical error he used to pressure you. Haydock's glasses slipped, his voice strained. I told Slack it was for eye treatments, discarded by mistake. I had no reason to harm Prothero. Perhaps not, Miss Marple said, her gaze shifting to Mrs. Lestrange. And you, Mrs. Lestrange, seen near the vicarage, a glove with your initial found in the woods, yet you claim you were home alone. A shadowy figure, aren't you? Mrs. Lestrange's locket gleamed as she leaned forward, her voice cool. I walk at night, Miss Marple. The glove isn't mine. Anyone can stitch an L. I had no quarrel with Prothero. Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles clicking in her mind. Then let's return to the clock. It was set to stop at 6:50, giving the killer time to escape before the vicar returned. But the study was locked, the window secure. How did they get in and out? The answer lies in a key. Not the key in your pocket, Vicar, but a duplicate, hidden in plain sight. Leonard's eyes widened. A duplicate? But I've had the only key for years. Not quite, Miss Marple said, her voice soft, but piercing. The vicarage is old, its locks older. Spare keys linger, in drawers, in attics. Someone found one, used it to enter, and left the same way, locking the door behind them. But they needed time, and the clock provided it. Slack's pencil paused, his eyes narrowing. A spare key? That's a stretch, Miss Marple. And who's this someone? She turned to Anne and Lawrence, her gaze steady. Mrs. Prothero, Mr. Redding, you've been truthful, up to a point. Your friendship was more, wasn't it? An affair, born of desperation. Prothero was cruel, his will a final blow. You wanted freedom and his fortune. Anne's face crumpled, her voice a whisper. It's true. I loved Lawrence. Lucius was unbearable. But we didn't kill him. Lawrence stepped forward, his voice fierce. She's telling the truth, Miss Marple. I'd have punched him, sure, but a gun? Never. Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her words cut like a needle. I believe you didn't pull the trigger, Mr. Redding, but you planned it, both of you. And you posted a letter, not to a cousin, but to Lawrence, confirming the plan. You knew the vicarage's routines, the spare key in the hall drawer, used for deliveries. You lured the vicar away with that phone call, your voice muffled by a scarf. Lawrence, you slipped in, using the key, and shot Prothero with your own pistol, a silenced one, not the one found, which was planted to confuse. The room froze, gasps punctuating the silence. Anne's hands shook, tears streaming. No, it wasn't like that. Lawrence's face paled, but his shoulders slumped, his defiance crumbling. It was for us. He'd have ruined her. As Slack's constables led them away, the room emptied, the fire's crackle the only sound. Leonard and Griselda clung to each other, relief washing over them. Dr. Haydock and Mrs. Lestrange slipped out, their secrets untouched, but no longer relevant. Lettuce, silent, followed, her sketchbook clutched tightly. Miss Marple remained, her knitting bag untouched, her eyes on the dying fire. The truth is a heavy thing, she said softly, to no one in particular. But it sets us free. Outside, St. Mary Mead awoke to a new dawn, its secrets
Laid bare, the vicarage stood quiet, its wounds healing, while Miss Marple returned to her cottage, her needles waiting. The case was closed, the web unraveled, and the village, though scarred, was whole again, its heart beating steady under her watchful gaze.